foundation. At 45, he owned Mitchell Construction, a company that had grown from a one-man operation 20 years ago into the most respected building firm in Cedar Rapids. His weathered hands and sharp gray eyes reflected a man who had earned every dollar through sweat and determination. Rob had met Jennifer Jen at a charity auction 15 years ago. She was 28 then, blonde and bubbly, working as a real estate agent. She'd been impressed by his success, his stability, his ability to provide the comfortable life she'd always wanted. They married within a year, and soon after came the children, Kevin, now 17, and Ashley, 15. For years, it seemed perfect. Rob worked long hours, often 6 days a week, to maintain their upper-middle-class lifestyle. Their four-bedroom colonial in the best neighborhood, the luxury cars, private school tuition, it all required constant effort. Jen had quit real estate after Kevin was born, claiming she wanted to focus on being a mother, though Rob noticed she spent more time at yoga classes and lunch dates than with the children. The first crack in the foundation appeared 2 years ago. Jen became distant, dismissive. She started staying out later, claiming book club meetings and girls' nights. The children, once excited to see him come home, began treating him like an inconvenience. Kevin would barely grunt acknowledgments, while Ashley seemed perpetually angry about everything he did or didn't do. Rob attributed it to normal teenage behavior and marriage growing pains. He was a problem solver by nature. Every construction project had obstacles, and you worked through them methodically. But as he sat in his truck outside the house that November evening, watching warm lights spill from the windows of his own home, he realized some problems couldn't be fixed with hard work and determination. The text from Kevin had been simple. Family meeting tonight. 7 p.m. Important. Rob had cut his site visit short, driving home with a strange knot in his stomach. Something felt different. Wrong. As he walked up the driveway he'd poured himself 5 years ago, Rob noticed Derek Hoffman's BMW parked down the street. Derek was a financial advisor, 10 years younger than Rob, with the kind of smooth confidence that came from never having worked with his hands. He'd been around more often lately, supposedly helping Jen with investment planning for her inheritance from her grandmother, who died last spring. Rob paused at his front door, key in hand, hearing muffled voices from inside. Through the window, he could see his family gathered around the dining room table, a table he'd bought and assembled, with Derek sitting in what Rob suddenly realized was his usual seat at the head. Chapter 2. The Vote. Rob turned the key and stepped in his own foyer, the familiar scent of Jen's vanilla candles mixing with something else, Derek's expensive cologne. The conversation in the dining room stopped abruptly. Kevin appeared in the doorway, taller than Rob now, but still lanky, his face set in an expression Rob had never seen before. Cold, almost cruel. "Dad." "Kevin, what's this meeting about?" Kevin glanced back toward the dining room, then stepped closer to the front door. "Look, we've been talking as a family, and we've made a decision. We took a vote." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "You're not part of this family anymore. We want you to leave. Go find somewhere else to eat." The words hit Rob like a physical blow. He looked past Kevin into the dining room, seeing Jen, Ashley, and Derek all seated around his table, avoiding his eyes. The Thanksgiving decorations Jen had insisted on putting up were mocking him now. Grateful family sayings and autumn leaves celebrating togetherness. A vote. Rob's voice was steady, though something cold was spreading through his chest. 5-1, Kevin said, his chin lifting with false bravado. "Derek's been helping us understand how toxic you've been. Always working, never here for us, making Mom miserable. We're done." Rob studied his son's face, seeing Jennifer's influence, but also something else, coaching. Someone had prepared Kevin for this moment, taught him what to say, how to deliver maximum damage. Through the doorway, Rob could see Ashley nodding along, her young face filled with certainty. Jen sat between the children and Derek, her hand resting on Derek's arm in a gesture of support that told Rob everything he needed to know. "I see." Rob looked at each face one more time, memorizing this moment. "Understood." He walked back to his truck without another word, his mind already shifting into the methodical mode that had built his business. As he drove away, He pulled over after 2 blocks and made a call. Morrison Law Firm, Frank Morrison speaking. Frank, it's Rob Mitchell. I need you to meet me tonight. My house. I'll explain when you get there. 2 hours later, Rob sat in Frank's office, having outlined the evening's events with the same precision he used to describe construction problems. Frank Morrison had been his attorney for 10 years, handling business contracts and the occasional neighbor dispute. Tonight, he was about to become something else entirely. Rob's phone buzzed. Jen's name appeared on the screen. He watched it ring, then go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. And again. You gonna answer? Frank asked. No. Rob's gray eyes were like granite now. I said understood, and I meant it. They made their choice. Now, they get to live with the consequences. The phone stopped ringing for a moment, then buzzed with a text. Rob, please call me back. I'm so sorry. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Please come home. Rob showed the message to Frank, then deleted it without responding. What exactly do you want me to do, Rob? Rob leaned back in the leather chair, his mind working through the implications of what he'd witnessed. This hadn't been a spontaneous family meeting. This had been planned, orchestrated. Derek sitting in his chair wasn't coincidence. It was a power play. The way Kevin had delivered his speech, the way Ashley had looked at him with such certainty, the way Jen had positioned herself between Derek and the children like they were her real family now. I want you to file for divorce tomorrow morning. I want every asset protected. I want a forensic accountant to go through every penny she's spent in the last 2 years. And Frank, Rob's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. I want to know everything about Derek Hoffman. Everything. Chapter 3. The Price of Betrayal. Rob spent that night in a hotel room, not because he couldn't go home, but because he wanted to think clearly without the emotional weight of familiar surroundings. He'd built that house with his own hands during the early years of their marriage, when money was tight and Jen was still pretending to love him. By morning, he had a plan. Frank Morrison was thorough and discreet. Within 48 hours, Rob had a complete picture that was worse than he'd imagined. The private investigator Frank hired had uncovered a trail going back 18 months. Jen and Derek hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been systematically poisoning his children against him while planning to take everything he'd built. The strategy had been Derek's idea, revealed through recovered text messages on Jen's phone. Turn the kids against Rob, make him look like the villain, then divorce him and claim he was an unfit father. With the children testifying against him, Jen could get custody, the house, substantial alimony, and Derek would slide into Rob's life completely. The inheritance from Jen's grandmother had been Derek's money, used to make Jen appear financially independent. They'd been planning to claim Rob was controlling and financially abusive, that Jen needed to rebuild her life. The kids had been fed a steady diet of lies. Rob didn't love them. He only cared about work. Their mother was miserable because of him. Rob read through the evidence in Frank's office, his expression never changing. Photos of Jen and Derek together going back over a year. Financial records showing money transfers. Text messages between Derek and Jen discussing how to handle the Rob problem and get the kids completely on our side. Most damaging were the recordings Derek had made on his phone during family dinners. Conversations where Rob appeared disinterested or tired after 14-hour workdays, edited to make him seem cold and dismissive. These have been played for Kevin and Ashley as proof of their father's neglect. They've been planning this for months, Frank said quietly. Maybe longer. Derek's not just after your wife, Rob. He wants your life. Rob set down the papers. What's Derek's background? Financial advisor, like you knew. But he's got debts. Big ones. Gambling problem that cost him his previous job in Des Moines. He's been eyeing your assets through Jen. Apparently told her he could triple her net worth once they were married and had access to your business accounts. And my children believed every word. Kids believe what they're told consistently by trusted adults. They had no reason to doubt their mother. Rob stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd helped build through his construction projects. Cedar Rapids wasn't huge, but it was home. Everyone knew Mitchell Construction, knew Rob as a man of his word, someone who delivered quality work on time and stood behind it. In 2 days, That reputation would start working for him in ways Derek and Jen had never considered. File the divorce papers, Rob said, but don't serve them yet. I want you to prepare something else first. What? Rob turned back to Frank, and his old friend saw something in those gray eyes that made him sit back in his chair. Rob had always been intense, focused, but this was different. This was the look of a man who had been pushed past every limit and found something cold and implacable on the other side. I want you to prepare a complete asset protection strategy. Everything I own, everything I've built, I want it restructured. If Jen wants to destroy my family, she can do it. But she won't get a penny from me. Not her, not Derek, and not my children who chose them over me. Rob, think about this carefully. I'm thinking about it carefully. They voted me out of the family, Frank. They said I wasn't part of it anymore. So be it. But if I'm not family, then they're not family either. And I don't owe strangers anything. Rob's phone had been buzzing constantly for 2 days. Calls from Jen, texts from Kevin and Ashley, voicemails that ranged from desperate to angry to pleading. He hadn't answered a single one. By Friday, Jen had shown up at his construction office. Rob, please, we need to talk, she said, rushing toward his desk as his secretary tried to stop her. Rob looked up from his blueprints, his expression utterly neutral. Mrs. Mitchell, do you have an appointment? The formal address hit her like a slap. Rob, don't be like this. I know you're hurt, but we can work through this. Derek was just trying to help us communicate better as a family. Derek, Rob set down his pencil. You mean the man who was sitting in my chair at my table in my house while my family voted to exile me? Jen's composure cracked. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Kevin got carried away. We just wanted to have a conversation about boundaries. And stop. Rob's voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. Frank Morrison has been my attorney for 10 years. He's very thorough. Would you like to know what he's discovered about your boyfriend's financial situation? Or should we discuss the 18 months of documentation he's collected? The color drained from Jen's face. Get out of my office, Rob said, returning to his blueprints. Any further communication goes through lawyers. As she stumbled toward the door, Rob added without looking up, Oh, and Jen? Tell Derek I said congratulations. He's about to find out exactly what winning really costs. Chapter 4, Building the Trap. Rob had always believed that the best way to defeat an enemy was to give them exactly what they wanted, but on your terms, not theirs. Derek Hoffman wanted Rob's life? He could have it, every last piece of it. Frank Morrison had outdone himself with the asset protection strategy. Rob's construction business was restructured as a complex web of LLCs and trusts. His personal assets were moved offshore or transferred to entities Derek and Jen couldn't touch. The house, their family home, remained in Rob's name, but now it carried a massive mortgage against assets they couldn't see or reach. Most importantly, Rob had discovered something interesting about Derek's past that went beyond gambling debts. Derek had a pattern, revealed through Frank's expanded investigation. 3 previous relationships with financially successful women, each ending in mysterious financial entanglements that left the women significantly poorer and Derek mysteriously able to start fresh somewhere new. He's a predator, Frank explained, showing Rob the files. Professional, sophisticated, but still a predator. This isn't crime. It's legal manipulation elevated to an art form. Rob studied the photographs of Derek's previous victims. Sarah in Des Moines, who'd lost her inherited family farm. Michelle in Iowa City, whose divorce settlement had somehow ended up in Derek's investment accounts before disappearing. Patricia in Council Bluffs, who'd signed over her late husband's life insurance to Derek's management and never seen it again. None of them pursued him legally? Hard to prove. He's smart, always has legitimate-looking paperwork, always gets them to sign willingly. They realize what happened months or years later, when he's moved on. Rob closed the files, but he made a mistake with me. How's that? He picked a target who builds things for a living. I understand structure, Frank. I understand how things fit together and how they fall apart. Rob leaned back in his chair. And I understand that the most devastating failures happen when you put pressure on the right stress point at exactly the right time. Over the next week, Rob began implementing what he privately called the Derek solution. It started with a simple phone call to Sarah Peterson in Des Moines. Ms. Peterson, my name is Rob Mitchell. I believe you knew Derek Hoffman a few years ago. I have some information that might interest you, information about his current activities, and some evidence that might help you recover what you lost. Sarah was hesitant at first, but when Rob sent her copies of Derek's text messages about managing Jen's finances, her tone changed completely. That bastard used the exact same phrases with me, she said. The exact same promises about tripling my money. Would you be interested in helping me make sure he doesn't do this to anyone else? What did you have in mind? Rob outlined his plan. It was elegant, legal, and absolutely ruthless. Derek wanted to be a predator? Fine. But every predator eventually discovered there was always something higher on the food chain. Meanwhile, the divorce papers remained unfiled. Rob wanted Derek and Jen to feel secure, confident that their plan was working. Let them think Rob was just sulking, that eventually he'd come crawling back or cave to their demands. Jen's calls had tapered off, replaced by increasingly demanding text messages. The children, coached by Derek, had sent him emails explaining why they didn't want a relationship with him anymore. Ashley's message was particularly cruel, explaining that Derek had shown them how to be a real family, and that Rob had never understood what that meant. Rob saved every message. Evidence was important when you were planning to burn someone's entire world down. The first stress test came when Derek began pressuring Jen to get Rob to refinance the house. According to the text messages Frank's investigator intercepted, Derek wanted access to the equity for his investment opportunities. Rob's response was swift and surgical. He had Frank leak information to Derek through a mutual acquaintance. The house was indeed being refinanced, with a massive line of credit being established against Rob's hidden business assets. Derek took the bait immediately. Within days, he was encouraging Jen to push for an immediate divorce settlement, claiming they could get half of everything before Rob could hide it further. What Derek didn't know was that the assets he was so eager to claim were about to become very expensive liabilities, and that Rob had already moved everything of value beyond their reach. But the real trap was still being built. Rob had contacted all three of Derek's previous victims, sharing information and coordinating their stories. Frank had consulted with attorneys in 3 different cities, building a legal web that would close around Derek from multiple directions simultaneously. Most importantly, Rob had set up a meeting with Derek's current financial services employer, a meeting Derek knew nothing about. You want to tell them what? Frank asked when Rob outlined this part of the plan. The truth, that their employee is currently engaged in the systematic financial seduction of a married woman, using her assets and children to leverage a divorce settlement he plans to control. I want to show them the evidence of his pattern of behavior and ask if this is the kind of man they want representing their firm. That could destroy his career. Rob's smile was cold enough to freeze water. Frank, destroying his career is just the appetizer. I haven't even started the main course yet. Chapter 5, The Perfect Storm. Derek Hoffman prided himself on reading people, but he'd fundamentally misunderstood Rob Mitchell. Derek saw a working-class man who'd gotten lucky in construction, someone without the sophistication to fight back effectively. He'd built his strategy around that assumption. Rob let him keep believing it. The meeting with Derek's employer, Pinnacle Financial Services, was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Rob arrived early, wearing his best suit and carrying a leather portfolio that looked like serious business. The 3 executives who met with him, Regional Manager Todd Brennan, Compliance Officer Lisa Chong, and Corporate Relations Director Mark Villanueva, had agreed to the meeting because Mitchell Construction was a significant potential client. Gentlemen, ma'am, thank you for seeing me. I'm here because I'm concerned about one of your employees' conduct affecting my family and my business interests. Rob laid out the evidence methodically. The affair, the manipulation of his children, the pattern of financial predation with Derek's previous victims. And most damaging, the recorded conversations where Derek discussed managing Jen's assets and accessing the husband's business accounts. He's not just having an affair with my wife, Rob explained. He's systematically destroying my family to gain access to my assets. And based on these files, it's not the first time he's done this. Lisa Chong examined the evidence with increasing alarm. Todd Brennan's face grew darker as he read Derek's text messages about stupid construction worker and easy marks. Mr. Mitchell, Mark Villanueva said carefully, "These are very serious allegations. Are you prepared to formalize this complaint?" "I am. But more importantly, I want you to understand that Derek Hoffman isn't just damaging his own reputation. He's using your firm's credibility to gain trust with his victims. When my wife introduced him to our neighbors, she called him Derek from Pinnacle. That makes you complicit in his eyes." The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, Rob had 3 new allies and Derek Hoffman had 3 days left of employment. But the real masterpiece was still unfolding at home. Rob had finally agreed to meet with Jen, ostensibly to discuss terms for their separation. She'd chosen a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Cedar Rapids where they'd had their first date 15 years ago. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Jen arrived wearing the blue dress Derek had bought her, with new highlights in her hair and confidence in her step. She thought she was coming to negotiate with a beaten man. "Rob, I'm so glad you agreed to meet. I know this has been hard, but I think we can work something out that's good for everyone." Rob sipped his coffee and waited. "Derek has some excellent ideas about how to structure a settlement that could actually benefit you too. We could set up joint custody arrangements that give you more time with the kids once they've had space to process everything." "Process everything," Rob repeated. "You have to understand, they felt abandoned. You were always working, always stressed about money." Derek helped them see that it wasn't their fault, that some adults just aren't equipped for family life. Derek helped them see that. Jen's confidence faltered slightly at Rob's tone. "He's very good with children. He understands how to communicate with them on their level." "I'm sure he does. Tell me, how much of my business finances has Derek seen?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, when he was helping you plan our divorce. How much access did you give him to my financial information?" "Rob, he's a financial advisor. I needed professional help understanding our assets so I could protect the children's interests." Rob nodded thoughtfully. "And did Derek advise you to have the children write those emails explaining why they don't want a relationship with me anymore?" "They needed to express their feelings." "Did Derek advise you to have them write those emails, yes or no?" Jen's face flushed. "Sometimes children need help articulating complex emotions." "I see." Rob pulled out his phone and showed her a text message thread. "These are conversations between Derek and his friend Marcus from Des Moines. Marcus helped Derek with his previous relationships. Would you like me to read Derek's text from last Tuesday?" Jen's face went white as Rob began reading. "The kids are completely turned now. Rob's been cut off for 2 weeks and hasn't even tried to contact them. Wife is ready to file and thinking I'm her savior. Should have his business accounts accessible within a month. This one's worth at least 10 times what the Iowa City woman was. That's not, he didn't mean. There's more. Already got her to give me power of attorney for the grandmother inheritance. She thinks it's for tax purposes. Once the divorce is final and I can access the construction assets, we'll be set for life. Might even keep this one around longer since she's better looking than the others." Jen stood up so quickly she knocked over her coffee. "You're lying. Derek wouldn't. He loves me." Rob looked up at her with something that might have been pity if there'd been any warmth left in his heart for her. "Derek loves your access to my money, Jen. Just like he loved Sarah's family farm and Michelle's divorce settlement and Patricia's life insurance." "I don't believe you." "You don't have to, but you might want to call Derek and ask him why Pinnacle Financial Services just fired him, or why 3 women from his past just filed a joint civil suit against him, or why the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is now reviewing his investment practices." Rob stood, leaving $20 on the table for their coffee. "Oh, and Jen, you might want to check that inheritance account Derek's been managing for you. Last I heard, the FBI was very interested in where that money actually went." As he walked away, Rob could hear Jen frantically dialing her phone. Derek wasn't going to answer. Derek was currently in a conference room with federal investigators, learning that his victims had been far more organized than he'd realized. But Rob wasn't done. Not even close. Chapter 6. Checkmate. Derek Hoffman's world collapsed on a Friday. Rob knew this because he'd orchestrated every detail of the collapse. Time for maximum psychological impact. Derek had woken up that morning believing he was 3 weeks away from the biggest score of his career. The divorce papers still weren't filed, which meant Jen was stalling Rob just as Derek had coached her. Rob appeared to be isolated, defeated, willing to negotiate. Derek had even started looking at properties in Colorado, planning his next hunting ground once he'd cleaned out Rob's accounts. By noon, Derek was unemployed, under federal investigation, and discovering that his inheritance management account had been frozen by court order. By 5 p.m., Derek was sitting in his apartment, surrounded by legal documents, realizing that Rob Mitchell had played him like a master craftsman building a house, methodically, precisely, with every piece supporting the next until the structure was unshakable. The civil suit filed by Sarah, Michelle, and Patricia wasn't just about financial recovery. Frank Morrison had helped them structure it as a RICO case, a pattern of racketeering activity. Each woman's case was similar enough to establish a pattern, different enough to show Derek's sophistication. Most damaging was the evidence Frank had compiled showing Derek's use of Pinnacle's credentials and resources to gain trust with his victims. But the federal investigation was worse. The FBI had been looking into a series of investment frauds across Iowa, and Derek's name had appeared peripherally in several cases. Now, with Rob's evidence and the testimony of 3 previous victims, Derek had moved from peripheral suspect to primary target. Derek's first call was to Jen, demanding she come to his apartment immediately. His second call was to a criminal defense attorney who informed him that his retainer would be $50,000 and that he should stop talking to anyone about anything until they met. Derek didn't have $50,000. The inheritance money was frozen. His own savings had been spent maintaining his lifestyle, and his credit cards were maxed out from his gambling debts. Jen arrived at Derek's apartment in tears, clutching printouts of bank statements that showed her inheritance account was empty. "You stole my money," she screamed at him. "I invested it, just like we discussed. It's temporarily tied up in some federal review process, but..." "Temporarily? Derek, this is $60,000 for my grandmother. This was supposed to secure our future." Derek tried to calm her, but his composure was cracking. "Jen, listen to me. Your husband is playing some kind of game here. He's manipulating the system, using his connections to make us look bad. We need to stick together and fight back." "Fight back?" "Derek, the FBI called me. They want to interview me about our relationship and about my grandmother's money." "What did you tell them?" "I told them I needed to speak to a lawyer first, just like you taught me." "But Derek, what if Rob is right? What if I what?" "Jen, I love you. Everything I've done has been to build a life for us, for you and the kids. Rob is trying to destroy that because he can't accept that you've moved on." But even as Derek said the words, Jen could see the lie in his eyes. 3 days of phone calls with Rob's investigator, seeing the evidence of Derek's previous victims, learning that the romantic gestures and financial advice that had swept her off her feet were identical to what he'd used on 3 other women. It was impossible to deny anymore. "The things Rob showed me about Sarah and Michelle and Patricia. You said the exact same things to them. Word for word, Derek." Derek's mask finally slipped completely. Those women were naive. They didn't understand financial planning, didn't appreciate what I was trying to do for them. "You're different, Jen. You're smarter." "I'm not different," Jen said quietly. "I'm just the next one." She left Derek's apartment that evening and drove around Cedar Rapids for 2 hours, her phone buzzing with increasingly desperate calls from Derek and confused messages from Kevin and Ashley. Her children didn't understand why Derek was suddenly unavailable and why their mother seemed to be falling apart. Finally, Jen found herself parked outside the house she'd shared with Rob for 13 years, the house she'd planned to claim in their divorce, the house Derek had already spent in his mind. Rob's truck was in the driveway. The lights were on in his study, where he'd spent countless evenings working on bids and project plans to pay for their comfortable life. For the first time in months, Jen remembered what Rob had actually been like before Derek started reframing every memory. Rob worked long hours because he was building something for their family. He was tired at dinner because he'd spent the day solving problems and managing crews and ensuring their financial security. He was quiet sometimes because he was thinking, planning, always 2 steps ahead to make sure they never wanted for anything. Derek had taken those qualities, dedication, responsibility, careful planning, and convinced her they were flaws. Convinced her that Rob's steadiness was boring, his reliability was emotional distance, his hard work was neglect. Now she could see what Rob's steadiness actually was. It was strength, the kind of strength that didn't break when tested, but instead became something harder and more implacable. The kind of strength that could systematically destroy someone like Derek Hoffman without ever raising its voice or losing its temper. Jen sat in her car, staring at the warm light in Rob's study window, and realized that she'd thrown away 15 years with a good man for 3 months with a predator. Worse, she turned her children into weapons against their own father. And the most terrifying part was that she was beginning to understand that Rob wasn't going to forgive any of them. Not her, not Derek, and not Kevin and Ashley, who had chosen sides without knowing they were being manipulated. Rob had built his life like he built houses, with strong foundations and careful planning. When someone tried to tear that down, he didn't get emotional. He didn't get angry. He got even. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. Derek Hoffman's arrest made the Cedar Rapids Gazette's front page. The headline read, "Local financial advisor charged in multi-state investment fraud," with a subheading that detailed charges including wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. Derek's photograph, the same professional headshot he'd used to seduce 4 different women, stared out from newspaper boxes across the city. Rob read the article over coffee in his hotel restaurant, pleased with the thoroughness of the reporting. The journalist had done excellent work, connecting Derek's pattern of targeting recently widowed or divorced women, his use of professional credentials to gain trust, and his systematic method of isolating victims from their support systems. Most satisfying was the quote from FBI Special Agent Patricia Reeves. Mr. Hoffman's methods were sophisticated and predatory. He identified vulnerable women with significant assets, gained their trust through romantic relationships, then used their emotional dependence to gain access to their finances. We believe there may be additional victims who haven't yet come forward. Rob's phone buzzed with a text from Frank Morrison. Derek denied bail. Judge considered him a flight risk. Jen's interview with FBI is tomorrow. Rob had mixed feelings about Jen's situation. Unlike Derek, she was genuinely a victim, manipulated and used by someone who'd made a career of exploitation. But she was also the woman who'd spent 18 months systematically destroying his relationship with his children, who'd chosen to believe Derek's lies over 15 years of marriage, who'd voted him out of his own family. Forgiveness wasn't in Rob's vocabulary anymore. The real test was coming that afternoon. Kevin and Ashley had finally agreed to meet with him, their first face-to-face conversation since Thanksgiving. Jen had convinced them to come, though Rob suspected it was more about damage control than genuine desire for reconciliation. They met at Riverside Park, the same place Rob had taught both children to ride bikes, where they'd had family picnics and played softball on summer evenings. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Kevin arrived first, taller and more angular than ever, with Jen's blue eyes but Rob's stubborn jawline. Ashley came a few minutes later, looking younger than her 15 years, still carrying the baby fat that made her seem vulnerable despite her harsh words in recent months. "Hi, Dad," Ashley said uncertainly. "Ashley." "Kevin." Rob's tone was neutral, neither warm nor cold. They sat at a picnic table Rob had installed 5 years ago as part of a community service project. Kevin fidgeted with his phone while Ashley picked at her nail polish. "Mom said Derek got arrested," Kevin said finally. "Derek Hoffman is facing federal charges for financial fraud. He's been arrested before in other states for similar crimes. But Mom said you set him up, that you made up evidence to hurt him because you were jealous." Rob looked at his son, really looked at him. Kevin had Jen's tendency to believe what he wanted to hear, but he had Rob's intelligence. The question was whether that intelligence could overcome months of manipulation. "Kevin, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Can you do that?" Kevin nodded reluctantly. "When Derek started coming around, did your mother's personality change? Did she become more critical of me? More dissatisfied with our family?" "She may be." But Derek was helping her understand. Understand what specifically? Kevin struggled with the answer. That you weren't. That our family wasn't healthy. That you were always working and never really present. "I see." And did Derek suggest specific things your mother should do or say to address these problems? He gave her books about communication and family dynamics. And these books suggested that the solution to our family problems was for everyone to vote me out. Ashley spoke up for the first time. Derek said sometimes families have to make hard choices. That enabling bad behavior just makes everything worse. Rob studied his daughter's face, seeing the confusion there. Ashley, in the 3 months before Thanksgiving, how many times did Derek suggest that I was the source of problems in our family? I don't know. A lot, I guess. And how many times did he suggest solutions that involve including me in the family? Ashley's face scrunched up as she thought. He said some people can't change. That sometimes you have to protect yourself from toxic family members. Did he ever suggest that we try family counseling? Or that he talked to me directly about these problems? No, Kevin admitted. He said you just get angry and make things worse. Rob leaned back, choosing his words carefully. Let me tell you what Derek Hoffman did for a living before he met your mother. He found women with money, women who'd been hurt or were unhappy in their relationships. He would gain their trust, convince them that their families or husbands were the source of their problems, isolate them from anyone who might give them different advice, and then gain access to their money. That's not what happened, Ashley said, but her voice lacked conviction. Ashley, your mother had $60,000 from your great-grandmother's estate. Derek was managing that money. Do you know where it is now? Neither child answered. It's gone. The FBI seized Derek's accounts and found evidence that he'd moved your mother's inheritance into investments that only benefited him. Just like he did with Sarah Peterson's farm inheritance. Just like he did with Michelle Castro's divorce settlement. Just like he did with Patricia Williams' life insurance money. Kevin was staring at the table now. But he said he loved Mom. I'm sure he did say that. He said the same thing to Sarah, Michelle, and Patricia right up until he disappeared with their money. Rob pulled out his phone and showed them a photograph Frank's investigator had taken. Derek with Patricia Williams at a restaurant in Council Bluffs, holding hands and looking romantic. It was dated 18 months ago. This is Patricia. Derek told her that her late husband had been controlling and that she deserved better. He moved in with her, helped her restructure her finances, and convinced her that her adult children were trying to manipulate her. 6 months later, he was gone, and so was everything she owned. Ashley was crying now. But why would he do that to us? We were nice to him. Rob felt something crack in his chest. The first real emotion he'd allowed himself since Thanksgiving. His daughter was 15 years old. She'd been manipulated by an expert who'd made targeting vulnerable people his career. But that crack sealed over quickly. Nice to him or not, Ashley had voted him out of the family. Kevin had delivered the killing blow with obvious satisfaction. They'd chosen Derek over their own father based on months of lies. Yes, but they'd still made that choice. Ashley, Kevin, I want you to understand something very clearly. Derek Hoffman used your mother to get to my money, and he used both of you to hurt me in ways that money can't fix. Whether he convinced you to do it or not, you both participated in destroying our family. Dad, we didn't know, Kevin started. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You had 15 years of evidence about what kind of man I am, and you threw it away for 3 months of lies from a stranger because those lies were easier to believe. Rob stood up from the picnic table. Derek is going to prison. Your mother is going to have to rebuild her life from nothing. And both of you are going to have to live with the choices you made. What does that mean? Ashley asked. Rob looked at his children, really looked at them, for what he suddenly realized would be the last time. It means that you voted me out of the family, and I'm honoring that vote. I'm not your father anymore. You made that choice, and I'm accepting it. Dad, no. Ashley jumped up. You can't just abandon us. Kevin was angry now, which was somehow worse than when he'd been manipulated. I'm not abandoning you. You abandoned me. There's a difference. Rob walked back to his truck, leaving his children crying at the picnic table in the park where he'd once been the center of their world. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. It was also the most necessary. Chapter 8, Consequences. The Cedar Rapids legal community was small enough that Derek Hoffman's case became the talk of every law office in the city. Frank Morrison found himself fielding calls from attorneys representing Derek's previous victims. journalists wanting background on the investigation, and federal prosecutors building their case. He's looking at 25 years minimum, Frank told Rob during their Friday meeting. The RICO charges alone carry mandatory sentences, and the federal wire fraud counts are stacking up. His lawyer is already talking about a plea deal. What about Jen? She's cooperating fully with the investigation. The FBI understands she was a victim, not a co-conspirator. She won't face charges, but she's lost everything Derek touched. The house is heavily mortgaged now, the inheritance is gone, and she has no income. Rob nodded. He'd known this was coming, had planned for it, in fact. Jen's financial destruction was necessary for the larger lesson. What about the children? Frank's expression grew uncomfortable. Rob, they're minors. They were manipulated by an adult predator. Don't you think? I think they're old enough to understand consequences. They're certainly old enough to vote family members out. They want to see you. Jen says they've been calling and texting constantly since your meeting at the park. Rob's phone had been buzzing for 3 days with messages from Kevin and Ashley. Apologies, explanations, desperate attempts to undo what they'd done. He'd read them all and responded to none. Frank, I need you to prepare some documents for me. What kind of documents? Emancipation papers. I want Kevin and Ashley legally declared independent adults. If they're mature enough to make adult decisions about family loyalty, they're mature enough to support themselves. Frank set down his coffee with a sharp clink. Rob, that's their children. Your children. They were my children. They voted to end that relationship. I'm simply making their choice legally binding. You can't be serious. Rob's gray eyes were absolutely steady. Frank, I've spent 45 years learning that people show you who they really are through their actions, not their words. My wife showed me she was willing to betray 15 years of marriage for a man she'd known 3 months. My children showed me they were willing to betray their father for a stranger who told them what they wanted to hear. They were manipulated. Yes, they were. And they chose to be manipulated because it was easier than thinking critically or asking hard questions. That's a character flaw, Frank. That's who they really are underneath all the excuses. Frank stared at his old friend, seeing something that genuinely frightened him. What happened to you, Rob? I've known you for 10 years, and you were never this cold. What happened to me was that I learned the difference between loyalty and convenience. Jen loved me when it was convenient. Kevin and Ashley respected me when it was convenient. Derek came along and made disloyalty more convenient, so that's what they chose. Rob stood and walked to the window, looking out at the construction site across the street where a crew was pouring foundation for a new office building. You know what the difference is between that foundation and a family, Frank? The foundation is designed to hold weight. It's engineered to support everything built on top of it. But a family? A family is only as strong as its weakest member's commitment. And when that commitment fails, everything collapses. So, are you just going to walk away? From everything. I'm not walking away. I'm accepting reality. My family voted me out, so I'm out. My wife chose a predator over her husband, so she can live with that choice. My children chose lies over truth, so they can live with that choice too. Frank tried one more time. Rob, people make mistakes. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is for people who want to change, Frank. None of them want to change. They want me to pretend this never happened, so they can go back to taking me for granted. That's not change. That's manipulation. Rob turned back to his attorney. I want the emancipation papers filed by Monday. I want a formal withdrawal of any financial support for Kevin and Ashley. I want them to understand that actions have consequences. And if they're homeless, if they can't survive without your support, then they'll learn what I learned at 18. That survival requires character, determination, and the ability to distinguish between people who care about you and people who want to use you. Rob gathered his papers. Oh, and Frank, I want you to prepare one more document. A formal letter to Jen, Kevin, and Ashley, explaining that any further attempts to contact me will be considered harassment. They made their choice. Now, they get to live with it. That evening, Rob sat in his hotel room, reading the messages that continued to flood his phone. Ashley's texts were desperate, childish pleas that reminded him uncomfortably of how young she really was. Kevin's messages were angrier, demanding explanations and accusing Rob of abandoning his responsibilities. Jen's voicemails were the hardest to listen to. She was clearly broken, financially and emotionally ruined, begging for another chance. But underneath the desperation, Rob could still hear the same tone she'd used when defending Derek, the same willingness to blame Rob for not being understanding enough, forgiving enough, flexible enough. He deleted every message without responding. At midnight, his phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Rob almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Mitchell? This is Sarah Peterson from Des Moines. We spoke a few weeks ago about Derek Hoffman." "Sarah, how can I help you?" "I wanted to thank you. The FBI told me today that Derek confessed to stealing my inheritance. I'm going to get most of my money back, and he's going to prison for a very long time." "I'm glad to hear that, but that's not why I called. Mr. Mitchell, I know about your family situation. My attorney told me what Derek did to your children, how he manipulated them against you." Rob waited. "I wanted you to know that my daughter did the same thing to me. When Derek was working on me, he convinced her that I was making bad decisions, that I was being foolish and naive. She actually helped him isolate me from my friends, helped him gain access to my financial information." "I see. I didn't speak to her for 2 years after I found out what Derek had done. I was so angry, so hurt that my own daughter had been part of it. What changed? Time and therapy, and realizing that Derek was very, very good at what he did. My daughter was 28 years old with a master's degree, and he still fooled her completely. Your children are just teenagers." Rob felt that crack in his chest again, quickly sealed it over. "Sarah, I appreciate you calling, but my situation is different." "Is it?" "Mr. Mitchell, Derek stole my money, but you know what really broke my heart? The 2 years I lost with my daughter because I was too proud and too hurt to forgive her for being human." After Sarah hung up, Rob sat in the darkness of his hotel room, staring out at the city lights. Tomorrow, Frank would file the emancipation papers. Kevin and Ashley would be legally adults, cut off from any support or connection to their father. Jen would face bankruptcy and the social destruction that came with being publicly connected to Derek's crimes. And Rob would be alone, justified and victorious, and absolutely, completely alone. For the first time since Thanksgiving, Rob Mitchell allowed himself to wonder if winning was worth it. Chapter 9. The Foundation. 6 months later, Rob Mitchell stood in the lobby of his new office building, watching his construction crew put the finishing touches on a project that would define his legacy in Cedar Rapids. The Mitchell Center for Financial Literacy was 3 stories of classroom space, counseling offices, and resource centers designed to help people avoid the kind of predatory financial schemes that Derek Hoffman had perfected. It was funded entirely by Rob's settlement from Derek's criminal case and built with volunteer labor from construction crews across the city. The irony wasn't lost on Rob. Derek's theft had funded a facility that would teach people to recognize and avoid people like Derek. Frank Morrison approached from the elevator, carrying a leather folder that Rob recognized as containing legal documents. "The final papers came through," Frank said. "Derek was sentenced this morning. 28 years federal, no possibility of parole for 15. The judge called him a sophisticated predator who destroyed families for personal gain." Rob nodded. "And the civil suits? Sarah, Michelle, and Patricia will recover about 60% of their losses. Derek had hidden more assets than we initially found. Your wife, ex-wife, will get about $20,000 from the recovery fund. That's something at least." Frank studied Rob's face, noting the shadows under his eyes, the gray that had crept into his hair, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. "Rob, there's something else. Kevin graduated high school last week. He got a full scholarship to Iowa State for engineering." Rob's hands stilled on the blueprints he'd been reviewing. "Ashley's been working 2 jobs to help support Jen. She's maintained a 4.0 GPA and been accepted to 3 colleges. She can't afford any of them." "Frank, I know what you're going to say. They made their choice. They have to live with consequences. You're not their father anymore." "I've heard it all for 6 months." Frank set the folder down and looked directly at his friend. "But you know what I see when I look at you now? I see a man who won every battle and lost the war. You destroyed Derek Hoffman completely good. You protected yourself from further manipulation, Smart. But you also threw away 2 children who made a mistake when they were scared and confused and being lied to by an expert. Frank, Rob, let me finish. I've been your attorney for 10 years, but I've also been your friend. And as your friend, I'm telling you that this isn't justice anymore. This is just cruelty. Rob turned back to his blueprints, but he wasn't seeing the architectural details anymore. They voted me out of the family. They were kids, Rob. Manipulated kids who believed lies because the lies came from their mother and a man who made lying his profession. And now they know better. Lesson learned. Frank pulled out his phone and showed Rob a photograph. It was Ashley at her high school graduation, wearing a simple dress and a forced smile, standing between Jen and an empty space where a father should have been. Does she look like she learned the lesson you wanted to teach? Rob stared at the photo. Ashley looked older, thinner, with shadows under her eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of his own. But she also looked determined in a way that reminded him of himself at 18, when he'd been building his first house with second-hand tools and stubborn pride. What do you want me to do, Frank? Pretend this never happened? Go back to being the fool who worked 60 hours a week to support people who voted him out of their lives? I want you to remember that being right isn't the same as being wise. And being strong isn't the same as being cruel. Frank picked up his folder and headed for the elevator. Kevin's graduation party is Sunday at Riverside Park. Ashley organized it herself, worked extra shifts to pay for everything. They sent you an invitation. I know. I threw it away. Maybe you should reconsider. Maybe it's time to stop punishing children for acting like children. After Frank left, Rob stood alone in his new building, surrounded by the success he'd built from the ashes of his old life. The Mitchell Center would help hundreds of people avoid Derek Hoffman-style predators. Rob's construction company was more successful than ever. His reputation in Cedar Rapids was unassailable. He was the man who'd taken down a financial predator and protected his community. He was also the man who'd abandoned his children for the crime of being successfully manipulated by a professional. Rob walked to the window and looked out at Riverside Park, where he'd once taught Kevin and Ashley to ride bikes, where they'd had family picnics, where he'd last seen them 6 months ago. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Dad, I know you probably won't read this, but Kevin's graduation party is Sunday. We saved money for a really good cake, and Ashley made a banner. We keep hoping you'll show up. We know we hurt you, and we know we can't take it back, but we love you, and we miss you, and we're sorry. Kevin. Rob stared at the message for a long time, then saved it instead of deleting it. That night, he called Sarah Peterson in Des Moines. Sarah, it's Rob Mitchell. You said something to me 6 months ago about losing 2 years with your daughter because you were too proud to forgive her for being human. I remember. How did you get past it? The anger, the betrayal, the feeling that forgiveness would mean letting them win. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Rob, Derek didn't just steal my money. He stole my relationship with my daughter for 2 years. Those are 2 years I'll never get back. 2 years of birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday evenings when we could have been rebuilding our relationship. But she participated in what he did to you. Yes, she did. And she was wrong, and it hurt me terribly. But Rob, Derek was the predator. My daughter was just another victim. The difference was that I had the power to save our relationship. And I almost threw it away because I was more interested in being right than being her mother. What if I forgive them and they do it again? What if this whole thing taught them that they can treat me badly and I'll always come back? Then you'll deal with that when it happens. But Rob, what if you don't forgive them and you spend the rest of your life wondering what kind of people they grew up to be? What if you miss watching them become adults, miss being part of their successes, miss the chance to be a grandfather someday? After he hung up, Rob sat in his hotel room and pulled out a photo he'd been carrying in his wallet for 15 years. Kevin and Ashley as small children, building a snowman in their front yard. Kevin was maybe 6, Ashley 4, both of them laughing and looking at Rob with absolute trust and adoration. Those children had grown up believing their father was a hero. Then a predator had convinced them he was a villain, and they believe that too, because children believe what the adults they trust tell them. Maybe it was time to give them a chance to decide for themselves who their father really was. Sunday afternoon, Rob drove to Riverside Park for the first time in 6 months. He could see the graduation party from the parking lot. Maybe 20 people, balloons tied to picnic tables, a banner that read, "Congratulations, Kevin," in Ashley's careful handwriting. Kevin was taller than Rob remembered, filling out with the kind of lean muscle that came from honest work. Ashley looked older too, more serious, but she still had the same focused intensity she'd inherited from Rob. They saw him before he'd walked halfway across the park. Ashley grabbed Kevin's arm, pointing, and Rob could see the hope and fear warring on both their faces. He stopped at the edge of their celebration, suddenly unsure. 6 months of anger and justified isolation hadn't prepared him for this moment, for seeing his children as real people rather than symbols of betrayal. Ashley approached first, walking slowly like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Dad, you came. I got Kevin's message." Kevin joined them, awkward and hopeful. "We didn't think. We weren't sure you'd want to." Rob looked at his children, really looked at them, and saw teenagers who'd made a terrible mistake and spent 6 months living with the consequences. They were thinner, more serious, with the kind of careful maturity that came from learning hard lessons young. They were also his children, and despite everything that had happened, despite the betrayal and the anger and the months of silence, they were still his children. "I brought you something," Rob said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. Kevin opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a check for Ashley's college tuition and a letter of recommendation Rob had written for Kevin's scholarship applications. "Dad, we don't deserve." Ashley started crying. "You're right," Rob said quietly. "You don't deserve it. But I'm not giving it to you because you deserve it. I'm giving it to you because you're my children, and that's what fathers do." He looked at both of them seriously. "But understand this. What happened at Thanksgiving can never happen again. I will help you, support you, love you, but I will never again put myself in a position where you can vote me out of the family." That bridge was burned completely. "We know," Kevin said. "We've known for months. Dad, we were so stupid. You were manipulated by an expert. But you were also old enough to think critically and ask hard questions, and you chose not to. That's the part you're responsible for." Rob paused, choosing his words carefully. "I love you both. I forgive you both. But I don't trust you both, and that trust will have to be rebuilt over time through your actions, not your words." Ashley hugged him fiercely, and after a moment, Kevin joined them. Rob felt the ice around his heart crack for the first time in 6 months, letting in warmth and hope and the possibility of rebuilding something new from the ashes of what Derek Hoffman had destroyed. Later, as the party wound down and Rob helped clean up, Ashley approached him quietly. "Dad, what about Mom? She's not doing well." Rob looked across the park toward the parking lot, where Jen sat alone in her car, watching the reunion she couldn't be part of. "Your mother made her choices, Ashley. She chose Derek over 15 years of marriage, chose lies over truth, chose to believe I was her enemy rather than her partner. Those weren't the mistakes of a manipulated teenager. Those were the choices of a grown woman who knew better. But she was manipulated too. Yes, she was. And I'm sorry that happened to her. But Ashley, some betrayals cut too deep to heal. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt." Rob picked up the folded banner Ashley had made, running his fingers over the careful lettering. "I can forgive your mother for being fooled by Derek. I can't forgive her for turning my children against me, for voting me out of my own family, for choosing destruction over the hard work of rebuilding what we had." He handed the banner to Ashley. "You and Kevin are my children, and that relationship can be repaired because you were children when you made your mistakes. Your mother was an adult when she made hers. That's the difference." As Rob drove home that evening, he passed the Mitchell Center for Financial Literacy, its windows glowing warm in the twilight. Tomorrow, it would open its doors to help people avoid the kind of predator who had destroyed his family. Derek Hoffman was in federal prison. His predatory career ended permanently. Rob's construction business was thriving, his reputation stronger than ever. His children were speaking to him again, taking their first steps toward rebuilding trust and relationship. And somewhere across town, Jen sat alone in the ruins of a life she'd thrown away, learning that some consequences last forever. Rob Mitchell had spent 6 months learning that being right wasn't the same as being wise, that justice wasn't the same as healing, and that sometimes the strongest foundation was built not from perfect materials, but from broken pieces carefully rebuilt. His family would never be the same. But maybe, with time and effort and the kind of determined rebuilding that had always been Rob's specialty, it could be something new and stronger and worth the effort. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. But some foundations, properly constructed, could support almost anything built on top of them. The choice, as always, was in the building. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.